You're past your prime, Margaret. Maybe it's time to step aside and let someone younger take over, the HR director said, sliding the voluntary retirement package across the polished conference table. I looked down at the papers, then back at her perfectly manicured nails, drumming impatiently against the mahogany surface. 27 years with Henderson Associates, and this was how it ended? Not with recognition, not with gratitude, but with a suggestion that I had somehow expired like milk left too long in the refrigerator. I picked up the packet, stood slowly, and said 5 words that would change everything. I think you'll regret this. 6 months later, I was sitting in the corner office they said I'd never see, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as that same HR director cleaned out her desk 3 floors below. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Louise Patterson, and at 62 years old, I had become invisible in my own workplace. Not the kind of invisible that comes with being overlooked for a promotion or having your ideas dismissed in meetings, though both of those had happened plenty. This was the kind of invisible that comes with being seen as a liability, a relic from a bygone era who somehow hadn't gotten the memo that her time was up. I had started at Henderson Associates fresh out of college in 1997, back when the downtown Seattle office was just 4 floors in a modest building, and everyone knew everyone else's coffee order. The company specialized in logistics consulting, helping mid-sized manufacturers streamline their supply chains and reduce costs. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was solid, methodical, and it suited me perfectly. Those early years were a whirlwind of learning and growing. I threw myself into every project, staying late to master new software, volunteering for the assignments no one else wanted, and slowly building a reputation as someone who could untangle the most complex logistical nightmares. I had a knack for seeing patterns others missed, for finding the inefficiencies buried deep in a client's operations that were costing them thousands of dollars a month. By 2005, I was managing my own accounts. By 2010, I was leading a team of 6 analysts. I had survived 3 economic downturns, 2 major system overhauls, and countless management reshuffles. I knew the company's history better than anyone, had relationships with clients that spanned decades, and possessed an institutional knowledge that couldn't be taught in business school or downloaded from the internet. But somewhere around 2015, things began to shift in ways I didn't initially recognize. It started with small changes. The company hired a new chief technology officer, a 30-something wonderkind named Derek Chen, who spoke fluent startup and peppered every sentence with buzzwords like disruption, agility, and digital transformation. Suddenly, every meeting became about modernizing our approach, embracing new technologies, and attracting younger talent. I wasn't opposed to change. I'd adapted to plenty of new systems over the years, learned new software packages, adjusted to evolving client expectations. But this felt different. This felt personal. During team meetings, Derek would make comments about fresh perspectives and digital natives, while looking directly at those of us who remembered when email was cutting-edge technology. He instituted mandatory training sessions on social media marketing and something called growth hacking, presented by consultants who looked like they'd graduated from college the previous week. The company's hiring practices shifted too. Where we once valued experience and deep industry knowledge, now the emphasis was on, quote, cultural fit and innovation potential. The new hires were uniformly young, uniformly energetic, and uniformly convinced that everything we'd been doing for the past 2 decades was hopelessly outdated. They arrived with designer laptops and artisanal coffee preferences, speaking a language of metrics and KPIs that somehow made my 27 years of successful client relationships sound quaint and old-fashioned. I watched as colleagues my age began to disappear. First was Robert Chen, no relation to Derek, who had been with the company for 19 years. He was offered an early retirement package that was described as, quote, Chen, but felt more like a bribe to leave quietly. Robert took it, citing a desire to spend more time with his grandchildren, but I saw the defeat in his eyes during his goodbye lunch. He'd loved his work, thrived on the intellectual challenges, and wasn't remotely ready to stop. Then came Linda Morrison, 58 years old and one of our most successful account managers. She was restructured out of her position during a company reorganization that eliminated her department and distributed her responsibilities among 3 much younger employees. Linda fought it for a while, filed complaints with HR about age discrimination, but eventually accepted a settlement that included a non-disclosure agreement. She moved to Portland to be closer to her sister, but not before warning me that I might be next. I began to notice the subtle ways I was being marginalized. My input in meetings was acknowledged with polite nods but rarely acted upon. Projects I'd traditionally been assigned were handed to newer team members who were described as hungry and eager to prove themselves. When I suggested improvements based on my experience with similar clients, I was told that my ideas were old school and that we needed to think outside the box. The technology changes accelerated too. The company switched to a new project management system that seemed designed by people who believed that clicking 17 buttons to complete a task that previously required 3 was somehow an improvement. They implemented collaboration software that turned simple conversations into endless chains of notifications, emoji reactions, and status updates. Everything had to be documented, tracked, and measured, transforming straightforward work into bureaucratic puzzles. During performance reviews, my supervisor, a 34-year-old named Jessica Williams, who'd been with the company for 18 months, began including comments about my adaptability and openness to change. These weren't exactly criticisms, but they weren't compliments either. They were warnings, coded messages, that my relevance was being questioned. The breaking point came during a client presentation I'd been working on for weeks. The client was Morrison Manufacturing, a mid-sized auto parts supplier I'd been working with for 8 years. They were considering a major expansion and needed help optimizing their distribution network. I'd analyzed their current operations, identified several bottlenecks, and developed a comprehensive plan that would save them over $200,000 annually. The morning of the presentation, Jessica informed me that Derek would be joining us and taking the lead on the pitch. He wants to showcase our new analytical tools, she explained, avoiding eye contact. Your research is solid, Margaret, but Derek can present it in a way that really highlights our innovative approach. I sat through that presentation watching Derek butcher my analysis, misrepresent my findings, and confuse the client with unnecessary technical jargon. He'd plugged my data into some flashy visualization software that turned clear, actionable insights into incomprehensible 3D charts that rotated pointlessly on the screen. The Morrison team looked baffled, asked clarifying questions that Derek couldn't answer, and ultimately requested a follow-up meeting to, quote, better understand the recommendations. After the presentation, I approached Jessica privately. That client has been with us for 8 years, I said quietly. They trust our relationship, our understanding of their business. Derek's presentation made us look like we don't know them at all. Jessica sighed, the kind of sigh that suggested she'd been anticipating this conversation. Margaret, I understand your frustration, but we need to evolve. Our clients expect us to leverage cutting-edge tools and methodologies. Derek's approach might seem unfamiliar, but it represents the future of our industry. The future of our industry is still about solving problems and adding value, I replied. Fancy charts don't change that. Look, Jessica said, lowering her voice. I'm going to be straight with you. There are concerns about whether you're keeping pace with the changes in our field. Management feels like you might be more comfortable in a reduced role, something that plays to your strengths but doesn't require you to stay current with all the new developments. That night, I sat in my kitchen in my small Ballard neighborhood home, staring at a cup of tea that had gone cold while I replayed the conversation. Reduced role. The euphemism hung in the air like a bad smell. They wanted to shuffle me into some corner position where I could finish out my time without interfering with their grand vision of the future. I thought about Robert, happily settling into retirement but looking lost without the work that had defined him for decades. I thought about Linda, starting over in a new city at an age when most people were planning their exit strategies. I thought about all the younger employees who saw people like me as obstacles to their advancement, relics from a slower, simpler time, who just needed to get out of the way. But mostly, I thought about Morrison Manufacturing and the look of confusion on their faces when Derek failed to answer basic questions about their business, questions I could have answered in my sleep. I thought about the other clients I'd built relationships with over the years, the trust I'd earned through consistency and competence, the value I'd created that couldn't be measured in clicks or engagement metrics. I wasn't ready to be invisible, I wasn't ready to be reduced. And I certainly wasn't ready to let a 30-something newcomer with a head full of buzzwords convince me that everything I'd learned over nearly 3 decades was suddenly worthless. The next morning, I walked into the office with a decision already made. I was going to fight. Not with complaints to HR or appeals to fairness, but by proving that experience and competence still mattered. I was going to show them exactly what they'd be losing if they pushed me aside. I just had no idea how dramatically that fight would reshape not just my career but the entire company. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My investigation began with what I knew best: numbers. For the next 2 weeks, I arrived at the office an hour early and stayed an hour late, methodically gathering data that would either validate my suspicions or prove me wrong. I wasn't looking for smoking guns or dramatic revelations. I was looking for patterns, the kind of subtle but consistent trends that had made me successful at identifying inefficiencies in client operations. The first pattern emerged from the company directory. In 2015, the average age of employees at Henderson Associates was 41. By 2024, it had dropped to 32. More telling was the breakdown by department. While the support staff and junior analyst positions showed normal age distributions, every management role filled in the past 3 years had gone to someone under 35. Not some of them. All of them. I cross-referenced this with performance data, a treasure trove of information I could access through my team leader credentials. The results were illuminating. The older employees who'd been pushed out or marginalized had consistently higher client satisfaction scores than their younger replacements. Robert Chen's accounts, for instance, had maintained a 94% retention rate over 5 years. His replacement, a 28-year-old named Kyle Barrett, had already lost 2 major clients in 6 months. But the most damning evidence came from the project allocation system. I created a spreadsheet tracking every major project assigned in the past 18 months, noting the lead consultant's age, experience level, and project outcome. The pattern was stark. Experienced consultants were being assigned to smaller, routine projects, while newer hires got the high-visibility, high-value clients. The success rate on these prestige projects had declined by 23% since this shift began. Armed with this data, I made a decision that would have seemed unthinkable just weeks earlier. I was going to bypass Jessica entirely and request a meeting with her supervisor, Regional Director Amanda Foster. Amanda was 51, part of the old guard who'd built her career on results rather than buzzwords. If anyone would understand the value of institutional knowledge, it would be her. The meeting took place on a rainy Thursday morning in Amanda's corner office. She listened patiently as I presented my findings, her expression neutral but attentive. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. "Margaret, this is comprehensive work," she said finally. "And frankly, some of these trends concern me too. But you have to understand the position the company is in. Our competitors are all pivoting toward younger, more tech-savvy teams. Our clients are asking for innovation, for approaches they haven't seen before." "Innovation doesn't have to mean inexperience," I replied. "Look at the Morrison account. Derek's innovative approach nearly cost us an 8-year relationship." Amanda nodded slowly. "That's actually why I wanted to talk to you about something else. Morrison Manufacturing called yesterday. They're specifically requesting that you lead their expansion project. They said Derek's presentation made them question whether we truly understand their business." My heart jumped, but I kept my expression steady. "What did you tell them?" "I told them I'd discuss it with the team and get back to them." Amanda pulled out a file folder. "The truth is, Margaret, you're in a unique position. You have relationships with several of our oldest, most valuable clients. Relationships that took years to build and that Derek or Kyle or any of the new hires can't replicate overnight." She opened the folder and slid a document across the desk. I'm proposing something different. Instead of the reduced role Jessica mentioned, what if we created a new position, Senior Client Relations Specialist? You'd work directly with our long-term accounts, the ones where trust and historical knowledge are more valuable than flashy presentations. I read through the job description. It was essentially a lateral move disguised as a promotion, a way to keep me busy with established clients while the younger team members pursued new business. A gilded cage. Amanda, I appreciate the gesture, but this position is designed to keep me out of the way, not to utilize my skills. I'm not interested in being shuffled off to manage legacy accounts while Derek makes decisions about the company's future. Amanda's expression hardened slightly. Margaret, you need to be realistic. The industry is changing. You can either adapt to that change or be left behind by it. Or, I said, standing up, I can prove that experience and competence still matter. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done in 27 years with the company. I went around my immediate supervisor. I called Morrison Manufacturing directly and spoke with their operations director, James Hoffman, whom I'd worked with for nearly a decade. Jim, it's Margaret Patterson from Henderson Associates. I wanted to follow up on last week's presentation and address some of the concerns your team raised. Margaret, thank God you called. That presentation was, well, let's just say it wasn't what we expected. The young man seemed smart enough, but he clearly didn't understand our business the way you do. That's actually why I'm calling. I've been analyzing your expansion plans in more detail, and I have some thoughts that I think could save you significant money while improving efficiency. Would you be open to a follow-up meeting? Just you, me, and your core team? Absolutely. When can you come in? I scheduled the meeting for the following Tuesday, knowing full well that I was operating outside the normal chain of command. If the meeting went badly, it would give Jessica and Derek all the ammunition they needed to push me out. But if it went well, I spent the weekend preparing like I was defending my doctoral thesis. I reanalyzed Morrison's entire operation from scratch, diving deeper into their data than I'd ever gone before. I identified not just the obvious inefficiencies Derek had missed, but secondary and tertiary optimization opportunities that could compound their savings. More importantly, I crafted a presentation that spoke Morrison's language, practical, straightforward, focused on measurable outcomes rather than theoretical frameworks. No rotating 3D charts, no buzzword bingo, just clear problems and clearer solutions. The presentation took place in Morrison's conference room, a utilitarian space with fluorescent lighting and the faint smell of industrial coffee. Jim Hoffman was there along with their CFO, Linda Chen, and their head of logistics, Michael Rodriguez. These were people who measured success in dollars and cents, not likes and shares. I opened with a simple statement. 8 years ago, we helped you reduce distribution costs by 15%. Today, I'm going to show you how we can do it again. For the next hour, I walked them through my analysis. I showed them how their proposed expansion into the Southwest market could be optimized by leveraging existing distribution partnerships rather than building new facilities. I demonstrated how adjusting their inventory rotation schedule could free up $400,000 in working capital. I identified a shipping route inefficiency that was costing them $3,000 a month and had been overlooked in Derek's original analysis. But the breakthrough moment came when Michael Rodriguez asked about their Denver facility's capacity issues. Derek's presentation had recommended a costly expansion, but I'd noticed something in their historical data. Actually, Michael, your capacity issues aren't about space. They're about timing. Your peak shipping days don't align with your production schedule. If you adjust your manufacturing calendar by 2 days and implement a small buffer inventory system, you can handle 30% more volume without adding square footage. The room went quiet as Michael pulled out his phone and started calculating. After a few minutes, he looked up with a grin. Margaret, that change alone would save us the cost of the expansion. How did our previous consultant miss this? Different perspective, I said diplomatically. Sometimes experience helps you see patterns that aren't obvious from the data alone. Linda Chen leaned forward. Margaret, what would it take to have you personally oversee the implementation of these recommendations? Not your company, you specifically. I'll need to discuss that with my team, I said carefully, but I'm confident we can work something out. As I drove back to the office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. the satisfaction of doing work that mattered, of applying knowledge and experience to solve real problems for real people. Derek's flashy presentations might impress in a conference room, but they didn't move freight or save money or build the kind of trust that kept clients coming back year after year. I also realized something else. I'd just demonstrated my value in a way that couldn't be dismissed or diminished. Morrison wasn't asking for innovation or disruption. They were asking for competence. And competence, it turned out, was still in demand. The question now was what I was going to do with that leverage. I could use it to negotiate a better position for myself, to carve out a protected space where I could work with clients who valued experience. Or I could use it for something bigger, something that might change not just my situation but the entire culture that had made my situation necessary in the first place. Back at the office, I found an email from Jim Hoffman waiting in my inbox. The subject line read, "Proposal for exclusive consulting arrangement." The message was brief but clear. Morrison Manufacturing wanted to work directly with me on their expansion project, and they were willing to pay a premium for my exclusive attention. I stared at the email for a long time before forwarding it to Amanda Foster with a simple note. "We should discuss this." Within an hour, my phone rang. It was Amanda. "Margaret, what exactly did you present to Morrison?" "Solutions to their problems," I said. "Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" "You went around your direct supervisor to meet with a client independently. That's not how we operate." "It's exactly how we operated for the first 20 years I worked here. Results mattered more than protocol." There was a pause. "My office. First thing tomorrow morning." As I hung up the phone, I realized I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. But instead of feeling anxious, I felt energized. For the first time in months, I was playing offense rather than defense. And I was just getting started. The summons to Amanda Foster's office came at 7:47 a.m., delivered via a terse email that simply read, "My office, 8 a.m. Come prepared to explain your recent activities." I arrived 3 minutes early, carrying a portfolio containing every piece of documentation from my Morrison presentation, along with the client's feedback and their formal request for exclusive consulting services. Amanda wasn't alone. Jessica Williams sat rigidly in one of the leather chairs facing Amanda's desk, her expression somewhere between nervous and vindicated. Derek Chen occupied the other chair, looking confident in the way that only comes from believing you hold all the cards. The setup was clearly orchestrated. This wasn't a conversation, it was a tribunal. "Margaret, please sit," Amanda said, gesturing to a chair they'd positioned directly across from the three of them. The power dynamics were unmistakable. Me against them, isolated and outnumbered. "Before we begin," I said, remaining standing, "I want to be clear about something. I've done nothing wrong. I met with a long-standing client to address their concerns about our service delivery. That client has now submitted a formal request to work exclusively with me on their expansion project. I believe that qualifies as a success story." Derek leaned forward, his voice carrying that particular tone of condescension that younger men often use when addressing older women. "Margaret, the issue isn't the outcome, though your methods were highly irregular. The issue is that you completely undermined the project lead and violated our established protocols." "What protocols?" I asked. "The protocol that says experienced consultants should be sidelined while newer hires present work they don't understand? Or the protocol that prioritizes flashy presentations over actual results?" Jessica cleared her throat. "Margaret, Derek is the assigned lead on the Morrison account. By going around him and presenting your own analysis, you've created confusion about our internal structure and potentially damaged our professional relationships." "Damaged our professional relationships?" I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. "Morrison is specifically requesting my involvement because Derek's presentation nearly cost us their business. How is responding to a client's needs damaging our relationship with them?" Amanda held up a hand to stop the escalating tension. "The Morrison situation aside, there's a larger issue here. Margaret, you've been gathering internal data about hiring practices, age demographics, and project assignments. Some might view that as problematic. So they knew about my research. I shouldn't have been surprised. In a company this size, very little happened without leaving digital footprints. But their knowledge of it revealed something important. They were threatened by what I'd discovered. I've been analyzing data to better understand changes in our operational effectiveness, I said carefully. Is gathering data to improve business outcomes now considered problematic? Derek's laugh was sharp and humorless. Come on, Margaret. You're clearly building a case for some kind of age discrimination complaint. That's not data analysis. That's a fishing expedition. If asking questions about declining client satisfaction rates and increased project failure rates constitutes fishing, then yes, I'm fishing. But I'm fishing for solutions, not lawsuits. Solutions? Jessica's voice rose slightly. Margaret, you're not in a position to identify company-wide solutions. Your role is to execute the strategies developed by senior management. My role, I said, my own voice hardening, is to serve our clients effectively and contribute to the company's success, which is exactly what I did with Morrison. Amanda leaned back in her chair, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. Margaret, let's cut to the chase. Morrison's request puts us in a difficult position. They're asking for you specifically, but Derek is the project lead. We can't have consultants going rogue and undermining our management structure. Then promote Derek to a role where his skills are better utilized, I said. Put him on new business development, where his energy and tech savvy can attract younger clients. Let me handle the established accounts where relationships and institutional knowledge matter. The silence that followed was telling. Derek's confident expression flickered. He clearly hadn't expected me to suggest a solution that acknowledged his strengths while preserving my position. Jessica looked to Amanda for guidance, suddenly uncertain about the script. That's not how organizational restructuring works, Amanda said finally. We can't redesign the company around individual preferences. But you can redesign it around client needs, I countered. Morrison isn't the only long-term client who's expressed concerns about working with newer consultants. Patterson Electronics, Midwest Distribution, Summit Manufacturing, they've all made comments about missing the continuity they used to have with their account managers. Derek's jaw tightened. Are you saying these clients have complained about my work? I'm saying they've expressed a preference for working with consultants who understand their business history and operational culture. That's not a criticism of your abilities. It's a recognition that different clients have different needs. This is exactly the problem, Jessica interjected. You're creating divisions between old clients and new approaches. We need consistency in our service delivery, not separate tracks for different generations of consultants. Consistency in mediocrity isn't better than excellence tailored to client needs, I replied. If our goal is to serve clients effectively, then we should match consultant expertise to client requirements. Amanda's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it with obvious irritation. I need to take this call. We'll continue this discussion later. She stood, clearly expecting the meeting to adjourn. Actually, I said, pulling a document from my portfolio, there's something else we need to discuss. Morrison's request isn't just for my involvement. It's for exclusive consulting services. They're proposing a 6-month contract worth $340,000, contingent on my direct oversight of their expansion project. The number hung in the air like a challenge. $340,000 represented nearly 15% of our annual revenue from consulting services. It wasn't the kind of money a company could easily walk away from, especially in a competitive market. Derek was the first to break the silence. They can't make demands like that. We don't restructure our entire operation because one client has preferences. One client? I pulled out another document. Patterson Electronics called yesterday. They want to discuss expanding their contract, but only if they can work directly with me. Summit Manufacturing sent an email this morning asking about my availability for their Q2 planning project. And Midwest Distribution is reconsidering their decision to go with Crawford Consulting, if I'm willing to lead their supply chain optimization project. I set the documents on Amanda's desk one by one, each representing substantial revenue and long-term client relationships. These aren't demands, they're market responses. Our clients are telling us what they value, and what they value is expertise, consistency, and relationships built over time. Jessica leaned forward to examine the documents, her expression shifting from defensive to concerned. When did all these requests come in? Over the past week, I said. Word travels fast in the logistics industry. When Morrison started talking about their positive experience working directly with me, other clients began asking questions about our service structure. Derek's confidence had completely evaporated. You're saying clients are specifically requesting to work with you instead of their assigned consultants? I'm saying clients are requesting to work with consultants who understand their businesses and can deliver results. If that consultant happens to be me, it's because I've spent decades building those relationships and developing that expertise. Amanda sat back down, her expression now purely business. What are the combined values of these potential contracts? I had the number memorized. Assuming all 4 clients move forward with their proposed projects, we're looking at approximately $890,000 in additional revenue over the next 12 months. The silence stretched longer this time, nearly $1 million in potential business, all tied to client preferences for working with me specifically. It was the kind of leverage that transformed workplace dynamics overnight. Of course, I continued, these opportunities won't last indefinitely. Patterson Electronics is already talking to our competitors. Summit Manufacturing has set a deadline for our response, and Midwest Distribution has made it clear that their decision depends on consultant availability. Derek stood abruptly. This is manipulation. You're using client relationships to force the company into a corner. I'm using client relationships to demonstrate value, I corrected. Isn't that what consultants are supposed to do? Amanda's phone rang again, and this time she answered it. Foster, yes, I understand. We'll discuss it and get back to you today. She hung up and looked at me with something approaching respect. That was Morrison's CEO. He wanted to personally emphasize how important this project is to them, and how specifically they want you involved. So what happens now? Jessica asked, her voice smaller than before. Amanda stared at the documents on her desk for a long moment. Now we figure out how to restructure our service delivery to meet client demands, while maintaining operational efficiency. You mean we figure out how to give Margaret whatever she wants? Derek said bitterly. I mean we figure out how to leverage our most valuable assets to serve our clients effectively, Amanda replied sharply. Margaret, I want a detailed proposal on my desk by end of business today. Show me how we can structure a senior consulting role that addresses these client requests while maintaining team cohesion. As Derek and Jessica filed out of the office, both looking shell-shocked, Amanda gestured for me to stay behind. Margaret, you've played this very well, she said once we were alone. But you've also burned some bridges. Derek and Jessica aren't going to forget this conversation. I'm not asking them to forget it, I said. I'm asking the company to recognize that different consultants bring different strengths to the table. And if I approve this new structure, if I give you the authority and autonomy you're asking for, what guarantee do I have that you won't use it to further undermine younger team members? I met her gaze directly. You have my word that I'll focus on serving clients and mentoring anyone who wants to learn. But I won't apologize for being good at my job, and I won't pretend that experience doesn't matter. Amanda nodded slowly. Get me that proposal. And Margaret? Make it good. You've got the attention of some very important people now. As I walked back to my office, I realized that everything had changed. I was no longer fighting to keep my job. I was negotiating the terms of my value to the company. The dynamic had shifted completely, and for the first time in months, I held the stronger position. But I also knew that Derek and Jessica wouldn't accept this reversal quietly. The real battle was just beginning. I had 6 hours to write the most important document of my career. Not a client presentation or project analysis, but a blueprint for fundamentally restructuring how Henderson Associates delivered consulting services. The irony wasn't lost on me. After months of being told I needed to adapt to change, I was now being asked to architect that change myself. I commandeered the small conference room on the 3rd floor, spreading out client contracts, organizational charts, and performance data across the polished table. My laptop hummed quietly as I opened a new document and stared at the cursor blinking on the empty page. Where do you begin when you're essentially redesigning your own job while justifying your continued existence? The answer, I realized, lay in the same approach that had made me successful with clients. Identify the problem, analyze the data, and propose solutions that delivered measurable value. The problem was clear. Henderson Associates was hemorrhaging institutional knowledge and client relationships in pursuit of a youth-focused strategy that prioritized innovation over effectiveness. I started with the executive summary, knowing that Amanda would likely read only the first page before deciding whether to implement my recommendations or find a way to ease me out gracefully. The Client Relationship Excellence Initiative, I titled it, deliberately avoiding any language that might sound like a critique of current practices. Henderson Associates faces a critical decision point, I wrote. Our long-term clients, who represent 67% of our annual revenue, are expressing clear preferences for consultants who understand their operational history and industry context. Simultaneously, our newer clients benefit from fresh perspectives and cutting-edge methodologies. Rather than viewing this as a conflict, we should recognize it as an opportunity to create specialized service tracks that maximize value for all client segments. The key was framing my proposal not as a power grab, but as a strategic response to market demands. I wasn't asking for special treatment. I was proposing a structure that would better serve clients while advancing the company's interests. As I worked, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Heard you stirred up quite the hornet's nest today. Some people aren't happy. Watch your back. A friend. I stared at the message for a moment before deleting it. Whether it was a genuine warning or an intimidation tactic, it confirmed what I already suspected. The morning's confrontation had created ripple effects throughout the office. I buried myself deeper in the proposal, outlining a 2-track consulting structure. Track 1 would focus on established client relationships, emphasizing continuity, deep industry knowledge, and proven methodologies. Track 2 would target new business development, showcasing innovative approaches and emerging technologies. Each track would have its own team structure, performance metrics, and advancement pathways. The genius of the proposal, if I did say so myself, was that it created opportunities for everyone. Derek could lead the innovation track, building a team of young consultants who shared his enthusiasm for disruption and digital transformation. Meanwhile, I would head the relationship management track, working with senior consultants who valued depth over breadth. But the real breakthrough came when I started quantifying the benefits. Using data from the past 3 years, I demonstrated that our client retention rate had dropped from 89% to 71% since implementing the youth-focused strategy. More significantly, the average contract value from long-term clients had declined by 22%, while our win rate on new business had improved by only 8%. The current strategy optimizes for acquisition at the expense of retention, I wrote. A dual-track approach would allow us to excel in both areas, potentially increasing overall revenue by 15 to 20% within 12 months. Around 2 p.m., Jessica Williams appeared in the doorway of the conference room. She didn't enter, just stood there watching me work with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Working on your proposal?" she asked. "Among other things," I replied, not looking up from my laptop. "Margaret, I want you to know that this morning wasn't personal. I was following company protocol." I stopped typing and looked at her directly. "Jessica, you've been my supervisor for 18 months. In that time, you've questioned my adaptability, suggested I might be more comfortable in a reduced role, and sat quietly while Derek undermined my work with clients. If that wasn't personal, it was certainly systematic." She stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "You have to understand the pressure I'm under. Senior management has made it very clear that they want to see innovation, fresh thinking, new approaches. When I advocate for consultants like you, I'm seen as resistant to change. And when you don't advocate for consultants like me, experienced professionals get marginalized regardless of their performance or client relationships." I saved my document and closed the laptop. "Jessica, I'm not asking you to choose sides. I'm proposing a structure where both innovation and experience are valued. The clients you mentioned this morning, when did they actually contact you about working together? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through recent calls and emails. Patterson Electronics called Tuesday afternoon. Summit Manufacturing emailed Wednesday morning. Midwest Distribution reached out yesterday evening. And Morrison has been requesting my direct involvement for 2 weeks. Jessica sat down across from me, her professional facade cracking slightly. Margaret, if those contracts are real, if clients are genuinely demanding to work with you specifically, then everything changes. We can't afford to lose nearly $1 million in business because of internal politics. The contracts are real, I assured her, and there are probably more. I've gotten 3 additional inquiries today from past clients who heard about the Morrison project. 3 more? Jessica's eyes widened. How much potential business are we talking about? I had been tracking the numbers all afternoon. Conservatively, another $400,000 over 6 months. But Jessica, this isn't just about me. Robert Chen still has relationships with former clients. Linda Morrison maintained connections even after she left. If we reach out to the consultants we've pushed aside, we might discover a significant untapped revenue stream. For the first time since I'd known her, Jessica looked genuinely interested in what I had to say. You're suggesting we bring back some of the people who've left? I'm suggesting we recognize that client relationships are assets that don't appear on balance sheets, but directly impact profitability. When we lose experienced consultants, we lose those relationships. When we hire young consultants, we gain energy and innovation but lose institutional knowledge. Jessica was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. If you're right about this, if there really is significant business tied to specific consultant relationships, then Derek's entire approach has been short-sighted, I finished diplomatically. But not wrong. We do need innovation and fresh perspectives. We just don't need them at the expense of everything else. What are you proposing in your document? I reopened my laptop and turned the screen toward her. A dual-track structure that leverages both innovation and experience. Derek leads new business development with a team focused on emerging technologies and cutting-edge methodologies. I lead client relationship management with a team focused on deep industry knowledge and proven approaches. Jessica studied the organizational chart I'd created. This would essentially create 2 separate consulting divisions within the company. 2 complementary divisions, I corrected. There would be collaboration between tracks, knowledge sharing, joint projects where appropriate. But each track would operate according to its strengths, rather than trying to force all consultants into the same mold. And Derek would be okay with this? I laughed. The first genuine laugh I'd had in weeks. Derek will be fine with it once he realizes he gets to run his own division and implement all the innovations he's been pushing for. The only difference is, he won't have to work with clients who don't appreciate his approach. Jessica continued studying the proposal, asking detailed questions about reporting structures, performance metrics, and resource allocation. As we talked, I began to see her differently, not as an obstacle to my success, but as someone caught between competing priorities who'd been forced to make impossible choices. Margaret, can I ask you something? She said finally. Why didn't you come to me with this analysis weeks ago, instead of going around me to meet with clients directly? It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. Because I didn't think you'd listen. I thought you'd see it as an older employee trying to protect her position rather than a consultant identifying market opportunities. You might have been right, she admitted. 3 days ago, I probably would have seen it exactly that way. And now I'm looking at nearly $1 million in potential revenue that we almost lost because we were too focused on organizational theory to pay attention to client preferences. I spent the rest of the afternoon refining the proposal, incorporating Jessica's feedback, and adding detailed implementation timelines. By 5 p.m., I had a comprehensive document that addressed every concern Amanda had raised and provided a roadmap for restructuring our service delivery without disrupting ongoing projects. The final proposal was 15 pages of detailed analysis, but the essence was simple. Stop treating experience and innovation as competing priorities, and start treating them as complementary strengths. Create space for both approaches to flourish, and let clients choose the consultant who best matches their needs. As I prepared to deliver the document to Amanda's office, I realized that somewhere during the day, my relationship with Jessica had fundamentally shifted. We'd gone from adversaries to collaborators, working together to solve a problem rather than fighting over who was right. Derek, however, was another story entirely. As I walked past his office, I could see him through the glass wall, speaking animatedly on his phone while gesturing at his computer screen. When he saw me, his expression darkened, and he deliberately turned his back to the window. Nad. The battle lines were drawn, but they weren't where I'd expected them to be. Jessica had become an unlikely ally, Amanda was cautiously supportive, and Derek was increasingly isolated in his opposition to change. The dynamics had shifted again, and this time I felt confident about which side would ultimately prevail. I knocked on Amanda's door at exactly 5:30 p.m. and handed her the proposal that would either secure my future at Henderson Associates or provide the framework for my departure. Either way, I'd proven my point. Experience, properly valued and strategically deployed, was still a competitive advantage in a world obsessed with youth and innovation. The response to my proposal came faster than I expected, but not in the way I'd anticipated. Friday morning, I arrived at the office to find an email from Derek Chen, marked Urgent Company-Wide Distribution, sitting at the top of my inbox. The subject line read, "Concerns regarding proposed organizational changes." I opened it with a growing sense of dread. "Team," Derek had written, "I've become aware of discussions regarding significant changes to our service delivery structure. While I appreciate all efforts to improve our operations, I have serious concerns about proposals that would fragment our unified approach to client service. I believe we should carefully consider the implications of any changes that might compromise our commitment to innovation and forward-thinking solutions." The email was carefully worded, professional in tone, but its intent was unmistakable. Derek was rallying opposition to my proposal before Amanda had even finished reviewing it. Worse, he'd copied the entire consulting staff, turning what should have been an internal management discussion into a public referendum on competing visions for the company's future. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Emergency meeting, Amanda's office. Now." I found Amanda pacing behind her desk, her usually controlled demeanor showing cracks of genuine anger. Jessica sat rigidly in one of the chairs, while Derek occupied his usual spot with an expression of carefully practiced innocence. "Derek," Amanda said without preamble, "explain to me why you felt it was appropriate to share internal management discussions with the entire consulting staff." "I wasn't sharing internal discussions," Derek replied smoothly. "I was expressing my professional opinion about the direction of our department. As CTO and senior project lead, I believe I have both the right and the responsibility to voice concerns about organizational changes." "Concerns about changes that haven't been approved or even fully discussed," I interjected. "You're essentially campaigning against a proposal you haven't read." Derek turned to face me, his expression shifting from innocent to confrontational. "I've read enough to understand what you're proposing, Margaret. You want to divide the company into old school and new school factions, with yourself leading the old school division. That's not innovation. That's segregation. I'm proposing we match consultant expertise to client needs," I said evenly, "unless you consider serving clients effectively to be segregation." "What I consider problematic," Derek continued, his voice rising slightly, "is the idea that some consultants are inherently better suited for certain types of clients based on their age or experience level. That creates a hierarchy that undermines our collaborative culture." Amanda held up a hand to stop the escalating argument. "Derek, regardless of your concerns about the proposal itself, sending that email was inappropriate. You've created unnecessary drama and forced my hand on discussions that should have remained confidential." "I apologize if the timing was premature," Derek said, though his tone suggested anything but apology. "But Amanda, we need to address the elephant in the room. Margaret is essentially holding the company hostage with client relationships. If we give in to these demands, what message does that send to our other consultants?" "The message," I said, my patience finally wearing thin, "is that competence and results matter more than politics and posturing." "That's exactly what I'm talking about," Derek shot back. "You're implying that younger consultants are less competent, that innovation is just posturing. How is that fair to the team members who've embraced our vision for the future?" Jessica cleared her throat. "Actually, Derek, I've reviewed Margaret's proposal in detail, and it doesn't diminish the role of innovation. It creates parallel tracks that—" "Jessica," Derek interrupted, "with all due respect, you're being manipulated. Margaret has orchestrated this entire situation to force the company into accepting her terms. First, she undermines my work with Morrison, then she goes behind our backs to solicit other clients, and now she's demanding organizational changes to accommodate her personal preferences. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Derek had essentially called me a manipulator and suggested that Jessica was too naive to see through my schemes. It was a calculated insult designed to isolate me and undermine the alliance I'd built with my former supervisor. "Derek," Amanda said, her voice carrying a warning, "you're out of line." But Derek wasn't finished. "Amanda, look at the pattern. Margaret has consistently resisted change, questioned new methodologies, and now she's leveraging client relationships to force the company to accommodate her resistance to innovation. This isn't about serving clients. It's about preserving a status quo that no longer works in our industry." I felt the familiar surge of anger that had sustained me through months of subtle discrimination, but this time I channeled it into clarity rather than defensiveness. "Derek, you're right about one thing. I have resisted change. I've resisted the change from competence to inexperience, from results to presentations, from client service to self-promotion. If that makes me resistant to innovation, then I'm guilty as charged." "See?" Derek turned to Amanda triumphantly. "She admits it. She's fundamentally opposed to the direction we're trying to move the company." "I'm opposed to throwing away 27 years of institutional knowledge in pursuit of trends," I clarified. "I'm opposed to losing million-dollar client relationships because we're more interested in impressing them with technology than solving their problems." Amanda sat down heavily behind her desk. "This is exactly what I was hoping to avoid. Derek, your email has turned a strategic discussion into a personnel conflict." "Because it is a personnel conflict," Derek insisted. "Margaret is using client relationships as leverage to protect her position. If we give in to these demands, every consultant in the company will start working around their supervisors to build personal relationships with clients." "Maybe they should," I said quietly. "Maybe if consultants focused more on building relationships and delivering results, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Derek's composure finally cracked. "That's exactly the attitude that's holding this company back. You think relationships are more important than methodology, that experience trumps innovation, that the way things used to be done is somehow superior to the way things could be done." "I think," I said, standing up, "that results are more important than rhetoric. And the results speak for themselves." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the voicemails I'd received that morning. Patterson Electronics called at 7:15 a.m. to formally request my involvement in their expansion project. Summit Manufacturing sent a purchase order for preliminary analysis work, and Morrison's CEO personally called to express his satisfaction with our service and recommend us to 2 other companies. I set the phone on Amanda's desk. 3 more clients, Derek. 3 more companies that specifically want to work with a consultant you're trying to marginalize. How many new clients has your innovative approach brought in this quarter?" The question hit its mark. Derek's face flushed, and for a moment he was speechless. When he finally responded, his voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "This is exactly what I mean. You're using short-term wins to justify long-term problems. Those clients want to work with you because they're comfortable with familiar approaches. But comfort isn't growth, Margaret. Comfort is stagnation." "Comfort," I replied, "is a $340,000 contract with Morrison Manufacturing. Comfort is a 94% client retention rate over 5 years. Comfort is the foundation that allows companies to take risks and pursue innovation without jeopardizing their core business." Amanda's phone rang, interrupting the increasingly heated exchange. She glanced at the caller ID and grimaced. "I need to take this. It's the Morrison CEO." She answered the call, her expression growing more concerned as the conversation progressed. "Yes, I understand your concerns. No, there's been no change in our staffing. I can assure you that Margaret will remain involved. We'll have a resolution by Monday." When she hung up, the room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. "Morrison is reconsidering their contract," Amanda said flatly. "They heard rumors about internal conflicts regarding their account management and wanted assurance that Margaret would continue as their primary consultant." Derek's face went pale. "How did they hear about internal conflicts?" Industry gossip travels fast, Amanda replied, especially when it involves major contracts and consultant changes. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Jessica said quietly. We're creating client uncertainty with our internal politics. Derek stood abruptly. This is unacceptable. Margaret has essentially weaponized client relationships to force her agenda on the company. We can't operate under the threat that any consultant can hold us hostage by cultivating personal relationships with clients. Derek, Amanda said, her patience clearly exhausted. You're the one who sent a company-wide email about confidential management discussions. If anyone has created this situation, it's you. I was trying to prevent the company from making a mistake that would undermine our entire strategic direction. Your strategic direction, I corrected. Not the company's, not the client's, yours. Derek turned to face me, his professional mask finally slipping completely. You know what, Margaret, you're right. This is about my vision for the company's future. A vision that doesn't include consultants who think the way things were done 20 years ago is somehow relevant to the challenges we face today. And my vision, I replied, doesn't include consultants who think client relationships and proven results are obstacles to innovation rather than foundations for growth. The confrontation had reached a breaking point. Two competing philosophies, embodied by two very different consultants, had collided with enough force to shake the entire organization. Derek's email had guaranteed that every employee in the company would choose sides, creating divisions that might take months to heal. Amanda looked between us with the expression of someone watching a train wreck in slow motion. This ends now. Both of you, out of my office. I need to make some calls and figure out how to contain the damage you've both caused. As we filed out, Derek brushed past me in the hallway. This isn't over, Margaret. You might have won this battle, but you've destroyed any chance of collaborative progress. Derek, I said, stopping him with a hand on his arm. I never wanted a battle. I wanted recognition that experience has value alongside innovation. You're the one who turned this into a war. He pulled away from my touch. Because some things are worth fighting for. The future of this company is one of them. On that, I said, watching him walk away. We actually agree. As I returned to my office, I realized that Derek's email had fundamentally changed the dynamics at Henderson Associates. What had been a private management discussion was now a public conflict that would force everyone in the company to choose between competing visions for our future. The question was no longer whether my proposal would be accepted, but whether the company could survive the civil war that Derek had just declared. The weekend that followed Derek's company-wide email was unlike any I'd experienced in my 27 years at Henderson Associates. My phone rang constantly with calls from colleagues, some offering support, others probing for information, and a few delivering thinly veiled warnings about the consequences of rocking the boat. Saturday morning brought a call from Robert Chen, the former colleague who'd taken early retirement 6 months earlier. His voice carried a mixture of vindication and concern. Margaret, I heard about what's happening at the office, he said. Linda Morrison called me yesterday. Word is spreading throughout the industry that Henderson is having internal problems. What kind of word? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. The kind that makes clients nervous about contract renewals. 2 companies have already called me asking if I'd be interested in consulting work because they're concerned about stability at Henderson. I felt my stomach sink. Robert, this was supposed to be about improving client service, not destabilizing the company. Maybe, he said gently, but revolutions are messy, Margaret. Even necessary ones. By Sunday evening, I had received 17 calls from current and former clients, 8 emails from colleagues expressing various levels of support or concern, and 3 voice messages from industry contacts asking if I was considering leaving Henderson to start my own consulting firm. The most troubling call came from Michael Rodriguez at Morrison Manufacturing. Margaret, I need to be direct with you. We've heard rumors about internal conflicts at Henderson regarding our account. Our board is concerned about continuity of service. We need assurance that you'll remain our primary consultant, or we may need to explore other options. Michael, I understand your concerns, and I'm working to resolve the situation. Can you give me until Wednesday to provide you with a definitive answer? Wednesday, he agreed. But Margaret, we can't have our expansion project caught up in your company's internal politics. Monday morning arrived with an atmosphere I could only describe as battlefield tension. Conversations stopped when I walked into the break room. People who'd worked with me for years suddenly seemed uncertain how to interact with me. I'd become either a hero or a villain, depending on which side of the generational divide they occupied. The first surprise came at 8:30 a.m. when I found Kyle Barrett, the young consultant who'd replaced Robert Chen, waiting outside my office. Kyle was 28, fresh from an MBA program, and had previously regarded me with the polite indifference that young professionals often show their older colleagues. "Margaret, do you have a few minutes?" he asked nervously. "Of course, Kyle. Come in." He sat across from my desk, fidgeting with his coffee cup. "I wanted to talk to you about Derek's email and everything that's been happening." "Okay." "I think Derek made a mistake," he said quietly. "Not just with the email, but with his whole approach to, well, to people like you." "People like me?" Kyle's face reddened slightly. "Experienced consultants, senior staff. I know Derek talks about innovation and fresh perspectives, but the truth is, I'm struggling with some of my inherited accounts. Robert's former clients ask questions I can't answer because I don't understand their history with the company." He pulled out a folder. "Patterson Electronics has been with us for 12 years. They reference conversations and decisions from years before I started here. When I can't provide that context, they get frustrated. Last week, their CFO asked if there was someone else he could work with, someone who understood their relationship with Henderson." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd find someone who could help. Margaret, would you be willing to work with me on the Patterson account? Not to take it over, but to help me understand what I'm missing?" It was exactly the kind of mentorship opportunity my proposal had envisioned, but Derek's resistance had made such collaboration seem impossible. "Kyle, I'd be happy to help, but you need to understand the political implications. Derek might not appreciate you working with me right now." "Derek doesn't understand client service," Kyle said with surprising firmness. "He understands technology and presentations, but he doesn't understand relationships. I've learned more about consulting in this 10-minute conversation than I did in 6 months of his innovation workshops." Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was Amanda's assistant, requesting my immediate presence in the conference room. "Kyle, we'll continue this conversation later. I think you're about to see how these political implications play out." The scene in the conference room was more formal than I'd expected. Amanda sat at the head of the table with 2 people I didn't recognize, a woman in an expensive suit, and a man taking notes on a legal pad. Jessica occupied her usual spot, looking uncomfortable. Derek was notably absent. "Margaret, please sit," Amanda said. "I'd like you to meet Sarah Mitchell from our corporate legal department, and James Crawford, our HR director." My heart rate spiked. Corporate legal and HR meant this situation had escalated beyond internal management disputes. Someone had decided that lawyers needed to be involved. "Miss Patterson," Sarah Mitchell began, consulting her notes, "we're here to discuss the recent conflicts regarding organizational restructuring and client relationship management. We need to ensure that all parties understand their responsibilities and that company policies are being followed." "I understand," I said carefully. "Let's start with the client contacts you've made over the past 2 weeks. Can you walk us through each conversation and explain the circumstances that initiated these discussions?" For the next hour, I provided detailed accounts of every client interaction, every phone call, every email exchange that had led to the current situation. Sarah Mitchell took extensive notes while James Crawford asked pointed questions about company protocols and chain of command. "Ms. Patterson," James Crawford said finally, "while we understand that client satisfaction is important, there are concerns about the methods you've used to cultivate these relationships. Going around your direct supervisor to meet with clients independently raises questions about adherence to established procedures." "What procedures?" I asked. "The procedure that says experienced consultants should watch silently while newer consultants damage client relationships? The procedure that prioritizes internal politics over client service?" Sarah Mitchell held up a hand. "Ms. Patterson, we're not here to debate company strategy. We're here to ensure that all employees understand their obligations regarding client communication and internal reporting structures. Are you suggesting I've violated those obligations?" We're suggesting, James Crawford replied, that your recent actions have created uncertainty about reporting relationships and client management protocols. That uncertainty has generated complaints from some staff members who feel that established procedures are being disregarded. Complaints from Derek Chen, I said flatly. Complaints from multiple staff members, Sarah Mitchell corrected. There are concerns that preferential treatment is being given to certain consultants based on their ability to leverage personal client relationships. The implication was clear. They were building a case that I had somehow acted inappropriately in pursuing client relationships and advocating for organizational changes. Derek's email had provided the pretext they needed to reframe my success as a policy violation. I'd like to be very clear about something, I said, looking directly at Sarah Mitchell. Every action I've taken has been in service of client satisfaction and company profitability. If maintaining excellent client relationships and advocating for effective service delivery constitutes a policy violation, then this company has bigger problems than organizational structure. Amanda finally spoke. Margaret, no one is questioning your commitment to client service, but the manner in which you've pursued these relationships has created internal conflicts that we need to resolve. The internal conflicts were created by Derek Chen's email and his resistance to any acknowledgement that experience has value alongside innovation. I proposed a solution that would benefit everyone. Derek chose to turn it into a public battle. James Crawford consulted his notes. Ms. Patterson, are you aware that several junior staff members have expressed concerns about working in an environment where their supervisor's authority can be circumvented through client relationships? Are you aware, I countered, that several senior staff members have expressed concerns about working in an environment where their expertise is systematically devalued in favor of youth and innovation buzzwords? The room fell silent. Sarah Mitchell and James Crawford exchanged glances, while Amanda stared at the table with an expression of barely contained frustration. Miss Patterson, Sarah Mitchell said finally, we need to discuss potential resolutions to this situation. Given the level of conflict that has developed, we're considering several options, such as mediation between affected parties, revised reporting structures, or, if necessary, separation agreements that would allow all parties to pursue their preferred approaches independently. Separation agreements. The euphemism for forced resignation, dressed up in legal language that protected the company from discrimination claims. They were offering me a way out that would preserve everyone's dignity while removing the source of conflict. Before we discuss separation, I said calmly, I think you should know that Morrison Manufacturing's CEO called this morning. They're threatening to terminate their contract if there's any change in their account management. Patterson Electronics has made similar statements. Summit Manufacturing is holding their expansion project pending resolution of what they're calling, quote, Henderson's internal instability. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the messages I'd received over the weekend. I've also had inquiries from 4 other companies about consulting work, all citing concerns about Henderson's current situation. The industry is watching this conflict very closely. James Crawford's expression shifted from confidence to concern. What exactly are you saying, Ms. Patterson? I'm saying that any separation agreement would need to address the transfer of client relationships and the potential impact on company revenue. I'm not making threats. I'm identifying business realities that should inform your decision-making process. Sarah Mitchell closed her notebook. Ms. Patterson, we'll need time to discuss these developments with senior management. We'll reconvene this afternoon to continue our discussion. As the meeting broke up, Amanda approached me privately. Margaret, what are you doing? You're backing them into a corner where they have no choice but to see you as a threat. Amanda, they already see me as a threat. Derek made sure of that with his email. Now I'm just making it clear that eliminating the threat might be more expensive than accommodating it. And if they decide you're too expensive to accommodate, I gathered my papers and stood up. Then they'll discover exactly how expensive it is to rebuild client relationships from scratch. As I walked back to my office, I realized that the morning's meeting had fundamentally changed the stakes. This was no longer about organizational restructuring or generational conflicts. This was about power, control, and the price of challenging established hierarchies. The company now faced a choice: adapt to the reality that experienced consultants brought irreplaceable value to client relationships, or risk losing millions of dollars in revenue to protect Derek's vision of innovation-focused service delivery. Either way, the Margaret Patterson who had sat quietly through months of marginalization was gone. In her place was someone who understood exactly what she was worth and wasn't afraid to demand recognition of that value. Tuesday morning brought an email that changed everything. It wasn't from Amanda, Derek, or anyone at Henderson Associates. It came from Thomas Richardson, CEO of Pacific Northwest Logistics, one of the largest consulting firms on the West Coast. Ms. Patterson, the email read, I hope you'll forgive the direct approach, but your reputation in the industry speaks for itself. We've been following the situation at Henderson with great interest. Pacific Northwest Logistics is expanding our client relationship management division, and we believe your expertise would be invaluable to our team. I'd welcome the opportunity to discuss a senior partnership position that would allow you to build and lead a team focused on long-term client development. The compensation package would be substantial. I stared at the email for 10 minutes, reading it 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. Thomas Richardson was offering me exactly what I'd been asking Henderson to provide: recognition, authority, and the resources to prove that experience-based consulting could be profitable and innovative simultaneously. But before I could fully process the implications, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Emergency all-hands meeting at 10 a.m. Amanda wants everyone there. The main conference room was packed when I arrived, with consultants lining the walls and some sitting on the floor. The atmosphere was electric with tension and anticipation. Everyone knew that whatever Amanda was about to announce would determine the future direction of Henderson Associates. Amanda stood at the front of the room, flanked by Sarah Mitchell from legal, and a man I didn't recognize but who carried himself with the authority of senior corporate management. Derek sat in the front row, his expression unreadable, but his posture suggesting he expected vindication. Thank you all for coming, Amanda began. I know the past few days have been difficult for everyone. Rumors, speculation, and internal conflicts have created uncertainty about our direction as a company. Today, we're going to provide clarity. She paused, surveying the room. First, I want to address the elephant in the room. Yes, we've been having discussions about organizational restructuring. Yes, there have been disagreements about how best to serve our clients. And yes, these discussions have become more public than anyone intended. Derek shifted in his seat, clearly anticipating his moment of triumph. Over the past 72 hours, Amanda continued, I've had extensive conversations with our major clients, our corporate leadership, and our legal team. I've also reviewed detailed analyses of our client retention rates, project success metrics, and revenue trends over the past 3 years. She gestured to the unknown man beside her. This is David Chen, no relation to Derek, our Vice President of Operations from the corporate office. He's here to announce some significant changes to our organizational structure. David Chen stepped forward, his expression serious. Ladies and gentlemen, Henderson Associates has reached a critical juncture. Our analysis shows that while we've successfully attracted new clients through innovative approaches, we've experienced concerning declines in client retention and project satisfaction among our established accounts. I felt a surge of vindication but kept my expression neutral. Simultaneously, Chen continued, we've received unprecedented feedback from long-term clients specifically requesting to work with senior consultants who understand their business history and operational culture. This feedback has been accompanied by explicit threats to terminate contracts if those requests aren't accommodated. Derek's confident expression began to fade. Based on this analysis, effective immediately, Henderson Associates will be implementing a dual-track consulting structure. Track 1 will focus on innovation and new business development, emphasizing cutting-edge technologies and emerging methodologies. Track 2 will focus on client relationship management and operational excellence, emphasizing institutional knowledge and proven approaches. The room erupted in whispered conversations. Derek looked like he'd been physically struck. David Chen raised his hand for silence. Derek Chen will lead the innovation track as Director of New Business Development. This position comes with expanded authority over technology implementation, methodology development, and new client acquisition. Derek's expression shifted from shock to cautious optimism. He was getting a promotion, just not the one he'd expected. Margaret Patterson will lead the Client Excellence track as Director of Relationship Management. This position includes authority over all established client accounts, senior consultant development, and long-term client strategy. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not just recognition, not just accommodation, but actual leadership authority. I was being promoted to the same level as Derek, with my own division and direct reporting to corporate management. But David Chen wasn't finished. Additionally, we're implementing immediate changes to our hiring and promotion practices. Experience and innovation will be weighted equally in performance evaluations. Senior consultants will be involved in training and mentoring programs. And all major client decisions will require input from both track directors. Amanda stepped forward again. I want to be absolutely clear about something. This restructuring isn't about choosing sides or declaring winners and losers. It's about recognizing that our clients have diverse needs that require diverse approaches. Some clients want cutting-edge innovation. Others value proven expertise. Our job is to excel at both. She looked directly at Derek, then at me. Both track directors will report directly to me, with equal authority over their respective areas. Success will be measured by client satisfaction, revenue generation, and team development. Competition between tracks is healthy. Conflict between tracks is unacceptable. The Q&A session that followed was intense but illuminating. Derek asked pointed questions about resource allocation and decision-making authority, clearly testing the boundaries of his new role. I asked about integration opportunities and cross-training between tracks, genuinely interested in building bridges rather than walls. But the most telling moment came when Kyle Barrett raised his hand. What about consultants who want to work with both tracks? Some of us would benefit from learning both innovative approaches and relationship management skills. David Chen smiled. Excellent question. We're implementing a rotation program that will allow junior consultants to spend time with both tracks, learning different approaches and finding where their strengths are best utilized. As the meeting wound down, Derek approached me with an expression I'd never seen before, something approaching respect mixed with wariness. Margaret, I owe you an apology, he said quietly. I let my passion for innovation blind me to the value of what you bring to client relationships. Derek, you don't owe me an apology for having different ideas about how to serve clients. You owe me an apology for trying to eliminate my voice from the conversation. He nodded slowly. You're right. I was so focused on proving that my approach was right that I couldn't see how your approach could complement it instead of competing with it. And now? Now I'm hoping we can figure out how to make both approaches successful. I have a feeling we're going to learn a lot from each other. Later that afternoon, I found myself back in Amanda's office, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. She poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from me like we were colleagues rather than adversaries. Margaret, I need to ask you something directly. How much of this outcome did you plan from the beginning? I considered the question carefully. Amanda, I never planned to challenge the entire organizational structure. I just wanted recognition that experience and competence still had value in a world obsessed with youth and innovation. But when you started gathering data about hiring practices and client satisfaction, when you began reaching out to former clients, that wasn't just reactive. No, I admitted. Once I realized how systematic the marginalization had become, I decided to fight back strategically. But I never imagined it would lead to this. Amanda leaned back in her chair. Do you know what convinced corporate to approve the restructuring? It wasn't your proposal, as good as it was. It wasn't even the client feedback, as concerning as that was. What was it? It was the email I received this morning from Thomas Richardson at Pacific Northwest Logistics. He sent a formal inquiry about hiring you away from us, along with details about the compensation package he was prepared to offer. I felt my face flush. Amanda, I never responded to that email. I never even considered. I know, she said, holding up a hand. That's what made it so effective. Richardson wasn't making an offer to you. He was making a statement to us. He was telling us exactly what you were worth on the open market. She pulled out a printed email. He also mentioned that he'd been contacted by Morrison Manufacturing, Patterson Electronics, and Summit Manufacturing about potentially following you to Pacific Northwest if you decided to leave Henderson. The full scope of my leverage finally became clear. The clients hadn't just been requesting my services. They'd been prepared to leave Henderson entirely if I wasn't available to serve them. Margaret, you've fundamentally changed how this company thinks about consultant value and client relationships. But more than that, you've proven that experience and innovation don't have to be mutually exclusive. What happens now? Amanda smiled. Now you get to prove that your approach can be as profitable and scalable as Derek's. You wanted recognition and authority. You've got both. The question is what you're going to do with them. As I walked back to my office, which would soon be relocated to accommodate my new position, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. 6 months ago, I'd been facing forced retirement. Today, I was a department director with authority over half the company's consulting operations. But the real victory wasn't the promotion or the recognition. It was the knowledge that I'd fought for something larger than my own career. I'd fought for the principle that competence and experience deserved respect, alongside innovation and energy. And I'd won, not by tearing down Derek's vision, but by proving there was room for both our approaches to succeed. The battle was over. Now the real work could begin. 6 months later, I stood in my new corner office watching the Seattle skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting on how dramatically my world had changed. The nameplate on my door read, Margaret Patterson, Director of Client Excellence, and the view from the 15th floor was spectacular. But the real transformation wasn't in my office location or title. It was in the culture of Henderson Associates itself. The dual-track structure had exceeded everyone's expectations, including my own. Derek's innovation track had landed 3 major new clients in the past quarter, including a tech startup that wanted cutting-edge supply chain analytics, and a renewable energy company that needed help implementing AI-driven logistics solutions. His team of young consultants thrived in environments where rapid iteration and technological experimentation were valued over proven methodologies. Meanwhile, my client excellence track had not only retained every threatened client but had actually expanded existing relationships. Morrison Manufacturing had increased their contract by 40% after seeing the results of our expansion project. Patterson Electronics had signed a 3-year renewal with additional services. Most surprisingly, Summit Manufacturing had referred 2 other companies to us specifically because of the depth of institutional knowledge we could provide. But the real success story was happening in the collaboration between our tracks. Kyle Barrett had become my unofficial liaison with Derek's team, rotating between projects and helping bridge the gap between innovation and experience. Last month, he'd led a joint project that combined Derek's advanced analytics with my relationship management approach, resulting in a solution that neither track could have developed independently. The morning brought my favorite part of the new routine, the weekly mentorship meeting with our junior consultants. Today's group included 3 recent MBA graduates and 2 career changers, all eager to learn what business schools couldn't teach about building lasting client relationships. The key, I explained to the group gathered around the conference table, isn't choosing between innovation and tradition. It's understanding when each approach serves the client best. Sarah Kim, a 26-year-old analyst fresh from Northwestern, raised her hand. But how do you know which approach to use? Some clients seem to want both. Smart question, Sarah. Let me give you an example. Last week, I had a client who needed help optimizing their distribution network, a classic operational challenge that we've solved dozens of times. But this client also wanted to explore drone delivery for remote locations, which required Derek's team's expertise in emerging technologies. I pulled up a presentation on the room's smart screen. Instead of treating this as an either-or decision, we treated it as a both-and opportunity. My team handled the core distribution optimization using proven methodologies, while Derek's team piloted the drone delivery system. The client got the reliability they needed for 90% of their operations and the innovation they wanted for the remaining 10%. Marcus Rodriguez, a former military logistics officer transitioning to civilian consulting, leaned forward. That sounds great in theory, but how do you manage the coordination between teams with such different approaches? That's where the real skill comes in, I admitted. Derek and I meet every Tuesday to review joint projects and identify collaboration opportunities. We've learned to speak each other's languages. He understands why relationship history matters, and I understand why technological capabilities can open new possibilities. The conversation continued for another hour, covering everything from client communication styles to project management techniques. What struck me most was how naturally these young consultants embraced the integrated approach. To them, combining experience with innovation wasn't a revolutionary concept, it was simply common sense. After the meeting, I walked down the hall to Derek's office, where I found him hunched over his laptop, surrounded by monitors displaying various data visualizations. "How's the renewable energy project going?" I asked. Derek looked up with the kind of excitement that made me remember why innovation mattered. "Margaret, you have to see this. We've developed a predictive model that can optimize wind farm logistics in real time, based on weather patterns and energy demand. It's reducing operational costs by 23% and improving energy delivery reliability." "That's impressive. Any client relationship challenges I should know about?" "Actually, yes. The client loves the technology, but their board of directors is asking questions about long-term stability and support. They want assurance that we'll be able to maintain and improve the system over time." I smiled. 6 months ago, Derek would have dismissed such concerns as resistance to change. Now he recognized them as legitimate business considerations that required relationship management skills. "Want me to join your next board presentation?" I offered. "I can address their continuity concerns while you focus on the technical benefits." "That would be perfect. And Margaret? Thank you for not saying 'I told you so' about the relationship stuff." "Derek, there's no 'I told you so' here. You've taught me as much as I've taught you. That drone delivery project you pioneered is now being requested by 3 of my traditional clients." The transformation wasn't limited to Derek and me. The entire company culture had shifted toward collaboration and mutual respect. Age-based stereotypes had largely disappeared, replaced by skill-based team assignments and cross-generational mentoring. Our employee satisfaction scores had increased by 35%, and our client retention rate had reached an all-time high of 96%. That afternoon brought a familiar ritual, my monthly lunch with Robert Chen and Linda Morrison, my former colleagues who had been pushed out during the youth-focused restructuring. We met at a small cafe near the waterfront, where we could talk freely without worrying about corporate politics. "I have to admit," Robert said over his salmon sandwich, "I didn't think you'd be able to change anything when you started pushing back. I thought they'd find a way to ease you out, just like they did with us." Linda nodded agreement. The age discrimination was so systematic, so ingrained in the culture. How did you manage to not just survive it but actually turn it around? I considered the question while watching ferry boats navigate Elliott Bay. I think the key was proving value, rather than fighting discrimination. Instead of arguing that age bias was wrong, which it was, I demonstrated that experienced consultants could generate revenue and client satisfaction in ways that complemented rather than competed with younger consultants. "But you took huge risks," Linda pointed out. "Going around your supervisor, meeting with clients independently, gathering data about company practices. Any of those actions could have been grounds for termination." "You're right, but I realized that playing it safe was actually the riskiest strategy. If I'd continued to accept marginalization quietly, I would have been pushed out eventually anyway. Fighting back, at least, gave me a chance to control the outcome." Robert leaned back in his chair. "So what's next for you? Any regrets about not taking that Pacific Northwest logistics offer?" "None at all. Thomas Richardson's offer was flattering, but it would have been about building something new from scratch. What I've accomplished at Henderson is more valuable. I've changed an existing culture and proven that experience and innovation can coexist successfully." "And Derek? How's that relationship working out?" I laughed. "Better than I ever expected. We still disagree on plenty of things, but we've learned to channel those disagreements into productive debates about serving clients effectively. He pushes me to consider new technologies and approaches, while I help him understand the importance of relationships and institutional knowledge." As we prepared to leave, Linda asked one final question. What advice would you give to other experienced professionals facing similar discrimination? I thought about Kyle Barrett, now thriving in his role bridging both tracks. I thought about the junior consultants in our mentorship program, learning to value both innovation and experience. I thought about Derek, whose understanding of client relationships had made him a more effective innovator. Document everything, I said finally. Build your case with data, not emotions. Focus on demonstrating value rather than fighting discrimination. And most importantly, don't let anyone convince you that experience is obsolete. The business world needs both fresh perspectives and institutional knowledge. Your job is to prove that your perspective delivers results. 6 months ago, I'd been a 62-year-old bookkeeper facing forced retirement. Told I was too old, too set in my ways, too resistant to change to contribute to a modern workplace. Today, I was leading a division that generated nearly half of Henderson Associates' revenue, mentoring the next generation of consultants, and collaborating with colleagues who had once dismissed my contributions. The most satisfying part wasn't the promotion or the recognition, it was the knowledge that I'd created something sustainable. The dual-track structure would outlast my tenure at Henderson, ensuring that future experienced professionals wouldn't face the systematic marginalization I'd encountered. As I returned to my corner office for the afternoon's client calls, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. They'd said I was too old to work, too inflexible to adapt, too outdated to contribute to the company's future. Instead, I'd become their new supervisor, leading a division that proved experience and innovation could not only coexist, but actually amplify each other's effectiveness. Sometimes the best response to being underestimated is simply to prove the estimators wrong. And sometimes the most powerful revolution is the one that expands definitions of value rather than destroying existing structures. I'd started this battle to save my job. I had ended it by transforming an entire industry's understanding of what it meant to age successfully in the modern workplace. Not bad for someone who was supposedly past her prime. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.